So, gents, we're back on Zoom for another awesome episode of the Landlord Page podcast. And this week we're going to be joined by Matt, who is actually the Managing Director of DPS, which stands for the Deposit Protection Service.
The thing that landlords, do need to remember, and doesn't always sit comfortably, is that it is the tenant's deposit, and the landlord, if they're making claim and that claim is disputed, it's the onus and responsibility is on the landlord to demonstrate their claim. So good inventories at check-in, good inventories at check-out, lots of fact-based evidence will ensure that you will be successful in your claim.
Now, Matt has got a hoard of data for us, so I'm looking forward to, as a bit of a data geek, looking forward to getting stuck into that. And obviously, years worth of advice, looking at things from a letting agency's point of view, a landlord and a tenant's perspective. So Tristan, I'll come to you first. What are you most looking forward to on this episode?
Yeah, for me, there's a recent report about the disputes and what's been arisen over the years and what the most common reoccurring issues are. So it'd be exciting to find out what those are and how we resolve it as an industry moving forward. So it'd be interested to hear from himself with the stats that they've got and go into the numbers and a bit more detail.
If you ever talk to someone that's thinking of becoming a landlord, one of the things that often stops them is the fear factor. So it'd be interesting to know what the percentages actually look like, because he knows the truth. So that will be exciting as well. Mike, what about yourself?
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head. The Weldon's wife's got a horror story about having their deposit taken away from them or not being able to claim on a tenant's deposit when it all goes wrong. And from a letting agent's point of view, I don't see that. So it will be really interesting for him to actually give the facts rather than the old wives' tales that you hear. I also want to know where the DPS and the similar schemes are going in the future, because the government's long-awaited white paper, now 2 years out of date, talks about lifetime deposits. So I want to see his opinions on things.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. Let's get him on. Okay, gents, so we're here for another episode on the Landlord podcast from the Landlord Page. I'm really, really excited to be joined with Matt, who is actually the Managing Director of DPS today. So we're going to talk about a really good service, which is obviously for tenants, landlords, and for estate agents to keep everyone safe and their money safe. How are you, first of all, Matt? How are things?
Yeah, we're all good, thank you very much. Business is busy, which is great. Lots and lots of transactions flow in and out of the DPS on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, it keeps all of the people involved in the DPS very busy most days. So, but it's good. Business is good. Thank you.
Excellent. And for the people listening, we've obviously explained it, but from your perspective in the business, how would you describe the business that you're the Managing Director of?
Yeah, so look, the DPS is one of three government-approved deposit protection schemes, and quite simply, we run a service that enables landlords and letting agents to submit deposits on behalf of their tenants to ourselves. We safeguard those deposits in our custodial scheme, or for those landlords and letting agents who choose to use an insured-based scheme, allows them to hold on to those deposits in their own client money accounts, but affords the relevant protection under the legislation that's passed in the Housing Act 2004. So effectively, we're holding that deposit monies throughout the duration of the tenancy, and at the end of the tenancy, when the checkout occurs or the tenancy ends, we repay that money in accordance with the agreement reached between the landlord and tenants.
I know we're going to touch on it later, but it's incredible to think there was ever done another way, actually. But we'll get into that. So just out of interest, really, why did you get into the property industry? Why did you become a property professional in this sector?
Yeah, an interesting question. I'm not sure I'd describe myself as a property professional, if you like. Although I have been personally involved in the DPS since before the launch of the scheme, and the scheme launched in April 2007, and I was involved in the original consultation that we undertook with government around that, and also the design of the scheme before the schemes launched in April 2007. So in that 14-year period, I have developed a pretty good understanding of the workings of the letting industry, let's say, and of course met some great characters along the way, and had a few lunches and the like with people within the lettings industry, which has allowed me to build up a really good, strong network and understanding of what goes on in that industry.
We are a special bunch, I will admit.
Yeah,
I'm sure you've had some good lunches. Talking of lunch, that's a great plug for you, Tristan, actually. I will send over to yourself to start through the body of questions, because I know you love a lunch as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Ian. So jumping straight into it, obviously DPS is there to protect deposits, but why is it important to tenants and landlords, not just the DPS, but similar schemes as well?
Yeah, look, I think first and foremost, we're providing that deposit protection service on behalf of the government, and that using these services like the DPS enables landlords and letting agents to comply with the relevant provisions of the Housing Act. So, we're the original and largest provider of that scheme across England and Wales. We currently protect around 1.8 million deposits, and we do that by providing easy to use, transparent deposit protection for the lifetime of the tenancy. On top of that, there is a free to use dispute resolution service. And I know we'll probably talk about disputes later on in this, but again, it's a way to avoid the sort of complex and expensive legal proceedings that could occur at the end of the tenancy if landlords and tenants can't agree. We literally handle thousands of transactions every day. Millions of landlords and letting agents and tenants are doing business with us over the last 14 years. So it's important for us that scheme and the way that people use the scheme is as easy as possible, and that we provide a secure environment for those deposit monies to be held within. So everybody's got peace of mind. And when you look at things like Trustpilot and the like, we've got a rating now of excellent, 4.6 out of 5 currently on Trustpilot. So we're clearly doing something right, and hopefully, our users will confirm that.
So if someone was to use the DPS, what's the process in order for them to use your services, and what services or what options do they have available when coming to you?
Yeah, it's really straightforward. If a landlord hasn't used our services before, the first thing they need to do is go to our website, depositprotection.com, and create an account. Pretty much like any other kind of e-commerce or retail type transaction, you create your account. We do some security checks around the landlord to ensure that they're the genuine individual and the like. And once that account is created, they can start to add properties. So you can create your entire property portfolio within the application. And then as you let those properties, you can append tenant details to that by simply updating the record, and of course submit the deposit to us. And you can submit that deposit via a card payment, again online. We do occasionally still receive the odd check, and some of our larger letting agents also pay via BACS transfers on a bulk basis. We're constantly challenging ourselves to make the DPS easy to do business with. So and deliver those services efficiently and as accurately as possible. So that whole technology interface really helps us to do that. And again, the feedback that we get from our users suggests that it is very intuitive, it's very easy to use. So again, you come back to that. Once you've done your registration and created your login, created your properties, you can then transact in terms of creating deposits, and then at the end of the tenancy, obviously go through the process to repay that deposit, and we repay through interaction with both the landlord and the tenants as part of that process.
And Matt, what would be the sort of split? I don't know if it's a stat that but what would be the split for lettings agents doing that part of the service on behalf of the landlord and kind of landlords doing it directly?
You've got me there, Ian. I don't know that particular. I know we do have a number of letting agent clients who create those, if you like, records and tenancies on behalf of landlords initially, and then the landlord themselves deals with the sort of exit process, if you like, the checkout, But I think in the majority of cases where we've got a letting agent acting on behalf of a landlord, they tend to take care of both the submission and the repayment. So it's probably a minority. Having said that, we do have an awful lot of private landlords who use us directly themselves. So they may still be using an agent to let the property, but then they take care of the deposit protection aspect themselves.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Amazing to know that there's still checks arriving as well in this day and age.
Just the odd one, yeah. I can't remember the last time I wrote a check, but anyway.
Yeah, we still get the odd one from a solicitor as well for payment, which is always a mind boggler. But there we go. Crypto payment soon.
Yeah, the future.
Mike's favourite, finding out how to bank a check in 2021 is getting harder and harder to actually get someone to take it off your hands.
Your banking app, you see, if you can get it to take the photograph right, you can get it to bank. But I reckon it's a success rate of about 2 in 10 for me.
So going on to deposits then, if someone, obviously the landlord's legally obliged to register a deposit, but talking about penalties, if someone doesn't register within the timescale, first of all, what is the timescale for those that don't know? And secondly, what's the penalty for not adhering to it?
Yes, it's all governed by the Housing Act 2004, and landlords are responsible, although many obviously use an agent on their behalf, but landlords primarily have the responsibility that within 30 days of receiving a deposit, they must protect that deposit in a government authorised scheme such as the DPS. The other thing that they must do is give a tenant a copy of something called the prescribed information, and prescribed information covers a number of points, mainly around the address of the property, the amount of the rent, who's living in the property, i.e. the details of the tenants, the details of the landlord, and of course the details of the scheme that particular deposit is registered within, so the name and registered address of that scheme. If they're using a custodial scheme, so that's the scheme where the DPS would look after those monies on behalf of the landlord and tenant, they must also provide a copy of the terms and conditions of that scheme as part of that prescribed information. Now, if you don't comply with those elements of the Housing Act, the penalties can be up to 3 times the amount of the deposit paid. So let's say you've got £1,000 deposit, you could be facing a penalty for non-compliance of up to £3,000. Now, that penalty is handed out effectively by a judge, by the courts, and they have discretion over how much they award. And tenants would, in effect, have to instigate that court action if they felt their landlord had not complied with the terms of the Housing Act around deposit protection and prescribed information. I think the other point is though worth remembering is that landlords and agents can't serve Section 21 notices unless the deposit has been protected correctly or been returned to the tenant, and they can't where there's been the prescribed information hasn't been properly served as well. So that's just another consideration as well as a penalty. There are some constraints there on landlords and agents if they don't comply.
There's some great info there actually, and I guess things like that for people listening, future landlords, current landlords, property investors and the like. Have you got a lot of that information? Do you supply any of that information on your website and blogs and things like that?
Exactly that, Ian. Yeah, we've got on depositprotection.com. There's a whole heap of advice available to landlords, letting agents on there. We have templates around prescribed information that can be downloaded. There is case studies in the Learning Centre that again can help on setting up deposits initially, how you need to engage with your tenants, and of course lots and lots of advice about how to manage that tenancy and deal with checkout and the like at the end of the tenancy as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'll check that out myself as well.
It's such a simple process to do, like you said, even from registering to doing it. So it's not hard to do. So anyone that's obviously looking to get into that, then do your research and obviously take a visit and have a look through that information. So for myself, and you've probably witnessed it as well, this year has been probably one of the busiest years in my experience in property. And I'm sure you're starting to see some trends from your side with increased tenant numbers, spike in prices, or maybe longer tenancy terms. Has there been any trends from your side? Is there anything that maybe you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, look, first and foremost, the PRS is incredibly, private rental sector is incredibly resilient. And year on year, we've seen growth. Every year since we launched the schemes, we've seen growth. One of the things that we have noticed, though, over the last sort of 18, 24 months, and whether this is influenced by the broader COVID word, let's use it, we don't know for sure, but we've seen periods where there's been fewer repayments and closures of deposits that we're looking after than we might have seen historically. Now, what we think is happening there is, and the data sort of suggests it, is that tenants are moving less frequently. So, they're staying in properties for longer where they're happy, and therefore, those levels of repayments are slightly lower than they were. Something else that we gather a huge quantity of data, but just purely based on the transactions and the volume of transactions that we manage. So one of the things that we produce quarterly is something called the rent index report, and that rent index effectively indicates the sort of rental value by property type, and then we take that at a national level, but we also then split it down into regional information. And what we've seen there is that the number of deposits for detached properties actually fell, i.e. new deposits coming into us, fell by about 17% on the previous quarter. Again, backing up our belief that those tenants are just remaining in those properties for longer, and therefore we're not seeing the same volume of turnover in that space. Also, we're also seeing rents rise. And on average, we've seen nearly 9% on detached properties in terms of rental value increase over the last year. So, that's well worth a look at. And you can see all those rent index reports, again, on the depositprotection.com website. And you can look at some of the trend information on there.
That's really good stuff, actually. And Mike, we obviously talk a lot when we're talking to anyone about what would be the best and safest asset that they could invest in from a property perspective. Invest in a family home, and the data there shows, Matt, that typically families are staying put for longer, and because the prices have risen.
We bang a drum on that, don't we? Because we feel like, especially in the location where we are in the southeast, with house prices being what they are, there's something of a tenant trap where we are. If you have children before you buy a house, it makes it very difficult to save for a house. So if you're in a family home and you're happy with your primary school, I think less people are relocating for work now, because you can get a job the other side of the country and work from home. More people are staying in the same place as long as they're happy with it. And as you said, the huge rise in rents on houses specifically, is kind of reflecting that there's a lot of people who want those houses, but those who are in them aren't going to give them up. Willingly,
I think
almost.
And the other thing we've definitely seen is we've seen an increase in the volume of lets coming from rural locations versus city centre locations. I mean, the city centres have come back a bit, probably quite a lot, really back to sort of pre-pandemic levels, if you like, in the last quarter. But certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw an awful lot of business coming into us that was from rural locations, and again, larger properties, people looking for more space, probably working from home, probably after a bit of outdoor space. So, the demand for that type of property, as you say, is absolutely there.
Yeah, we've seen the same ripple, I call it the ripple, out from London with the sales market as well. And what's quite interesting is, I think, stamp duty holiday, although it was obviously for sellers, what it did do is it gave people the ability to let to buy. So they would rent their properties out and they would move into the coast or wherever it may be, which is probably dictated by that trend there as well, I would have thought. I saw an article actually that I can't remember what newspaper it was in, but the people are regretting their move out of London. Not all of their friends moved away from London. They don't want to be out in the nice fresh air. And actually, there's a lot of people thinking of returning. So it'd be interesting to see what that trend does over the next 12 months.
The grass is always greener on the other side, isn't it?
Indeed.
I don't see it'll have much impact personally, with all the transport links that we have within our locations, especially going into London and how quickly you can get there. I don't see it having much impact on us, but those further afield, like you said, on the coast, and that may have different opinions. So, although I'd rather be sat in Bournemouth than in London, but each to their own.
Absolutely.
So a recent report come through it's literally a couple of months ago actually, that regarding disputes, and the biggest number one talked about thing was end of tenancy cleans has been flagging up, followed by damage and redecoration. In your experience, from what you've witnessed previously and recently, would you say this sounds about right? And is there any case studies maybe you could share with us?
Yeah, look, we've looked at some data over the past 4 years, and yeah, cleaning is the number one reason for deductions being claimed at the end of tenancies, and we see roughly 23% of all claims made relate to cleaning. Damage is number two, but slightly different. We see rent arrears as number three reason for seeking a claim at the end of a tenancy. In about 17% of cases, we'll see a rent arrears claim. What I would say though is that there are still a huge number of tenancies that are exited without any claims or any deductions. So there's a lot of good tenants out there and a lot of good landlords looking after those guys. But yeah, cleaning is number one. I think, in terms of case studies, again, we've got some case studies that are published on the website. But what I would say is, there's a couple of amusing little anecdotes. I mean, we've had, people submit mobile phones to us with pictures embedded within the mobile phone. Talking of which, there goes a mobile phone.
Hey, hands up on that one.
and even a charger with that mobile phone, so that we could charge it up to see the photos that somebody had taken of the condition of the property at the end of it. We had somebody send us a tap once, which was covered in limescale, and the reason they sent us the tap was to demonstrate that the tenant hadn't taken good enough care of the bathroom. So I'm not quite sure what condition the bathroom was without the tap, but anyway, these are the sorts of fun things that we get when we get a dispute, or where we get a claim being made and a landlord sort of substantiating that claim. Several times we've had sections of carpet sent to us with stains on them. So, all good fun.
And the key thing for landlords or for tenants listening, in its simplicity, is there's a third party reviewing these. So it's not A versus B. There's someone in the middle to split it and look at it from, I guess, a bit of common sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we have is that free to use, independent, and it's totally independent. We have no interest whatsoever in who gets what, as it were. All we simply are doing is we're reviewing the evidence that's provided to us, be that pictures, be that check-in reports, be that checkout reports, be that photographs, whatever it might be. We're reviewing that in the context of the claim that's made. And if the information provided to us substantiates the claim, then clearly we will find and award that claim. Conversely, if there is a lack of evidence to support a claim, then it's unlikely to be successful. I think the thing that landlords do need to remember, and doesn't always sit comfortably, is that it is the tenant's deposit. And the landlord, if they're making claim and that claim is disputed, it's the onus and responsibility is on the landlord to demonstrate their claim. So good inventories at check-in, good inventories at checkout, lots of fact-based evidence will ensure that you will be successful in your claim.
I think the main thing to say, or one of the main things to say, is please don't send the actual broken item into the DPS.
Absolutely.
From an anecdote, I've never heard of people actually sending the broken tap. I'm sure a photo of it would suffice. Otherwise, the office would be an interesting place.
Yeah.
And secondly, you mentioned it. I think it's probably something that Tristan's going to speak on in more detail. But detailed inventories are a massively important thing, because it is the tenant's money that the tenant is putting down, and so many times I've had landlords with a bee in their bonnet coming from other agencies saying, "Oh, well, I couldn't claim, my agent didn't defend me, and my particular deposit service found against me because the tenants had been there for 15 years and the carpet was ruined at the end of the tenancy." So, firstly, the tenant was there for 15 years, so the lifespan of that carpet is what, 8, I think, is your advice, something along those reasons. And secondly, what proof did you have of the change in condition? I said, well, it was fine when they moved in.
Yeah.
Is a kind of typical response I would get. So I know these things are sort of always got two sides of them, but it'd be interesting to know if you know the percentage that you go in favour of a landlord, or the percentage of cases that you go in favour of a tenant, because everyone seems to, and this is quite a contentious point because we're on the landlord podcast. I reckon more landlords make bad claims than tenants on deposits.
Yeah, look, I think you go back to the point, which is the landlord has to make a claim against the deposit. A tenant doesn't make a claim against the deposit. It's their deposit. They'll be looking for it to get it back, obviously. But if the landlord wants to make a deduction, they have to make a claim against that deposit. And what we see is we do see roughly 55% of all deposits are repaid in totality back to the tenant. Then we see a rough split of around sort of 22% is split between landlord and tenant. So there's an agreed position and it's split. And then we see roughly around 22%, which is being returned in full to a landlord. So for whatever reason, a landlord is making a claim and receiving the full value of that deposit back. Now, why that is, we really only determine that where there's a dispute. So if there's the reason for deduction is agreed between landlord and tenant, then that's not for us to interfere with.
So while we're on that subject then, so fair wear and tear should be taken into consideration when looking to make deductions from deposits. And I think there's some landlords out there that probably favour it more than others in their favour. But what should be considered when taking that into consideration, and what advice can you give to landlords that need to take fair wear and tear into consideration?
Yes, I think firstly, let's just talk about the sort of definition of fair wear and tear. And fair wear and tear effectively is the deterioration of the condition of a property or a fixture or fitting due to reasonable use. Okay, so there's some subjectivity in there straight away, but broadly that's what you're working around. And fair wear and tear is that principle that it will wear over time. So some landlords will mistakenly believe they can make a claim, as you sort of suggested earlier, for a carpet that's 15 years old because it wasn't returned to them in the condition when it was first let. So you've got to be mindful of, what is reasonable, what is fair wear and tear. And if that is fair wear and tear and you believe the use is reasonable, then is it likely you're going to be successful or be able to make a claim? The other thing that we see a bit of is something that we call betterment, where a landlord will seek to make a claim for the value of, let's say, a fixture or a fitting, say, for example, a fridge, and it's a cheap fridge that they've put into the property, and they're trying to make a claim based on a much higher standard of fixture or fitting. And again, that's betterment, and you can only make claim for the item that, if you like, that's there, that's in there, and irrespective of that item. What we would say is, to a certain extent, put yourself in the sort of feet of the tenant, and how would you feel objectively if that claim was presented to you as a tenant? Would they be happy to pay the full cost of replacement of that carpet if they'd only lived there for 3 years, or if that carpet was well used before they even arrived into the property? So I think what happens is tenants will dispute landlords' claims because they feel they're excessive or they feel they're unreasonable. In our experience, a tenant is far more likely, and the stats back that up. We see plenty of claims made by landlords that are not disputed by tenants, but a tenant is more likely to agree that claim if they believe it accurately reflects both the condition of the property, condition of the item that's the claim is being made against, and is reasonable.
Yeah, reasonable. And obviously that we touch back on the inventory, that's just a massive help in the whole scenario, because it shows the before and after, doesn't it? And you can't argue with that then.
Yeah.
So if someone can't come to a mutual agreement of a deduction between tenant and landlords, what's the process of a tenant getting their money back? And do they have an option to get their money back? Can you go into this in a bit more detail?
Yeah, for sure. So, look, I think firstly, if in respect of an amount of a deposit that isn't subject to claim, you will pay that back to the tenant. Even though there may be a disputed amount still in play. So, let's say again, £1,000 deposit. £800 of that is agreed to be repaid back to the tenant. We would pay that money back to that tenant at that point in time. With respect to the amount that a claim is being made against, firstly, a tenant can agree to that claim, or they can make an alternative suggestion, and they can do that via our website. So they log into our website and they, I agree with the claim being made, or actually, I don't agree with £200. I think it should be £100, whatever it might be. And in a lot of cases, we'll find that landlords and tenants effectively come to an agreement through the portal in terms of suggesting amounts for deduction and then agreeing on a final amount. And once that agreement is reached, we obviously then pay away the proportion of that disputed amount in accordance with the agreement reach.
Yeah.
If they can't reach an agreement, though, that's where the dispute service that we offer comes into play. Both parties must agree to use that dispute service, and effectively what we ask them to do is submit evidence to support the claim that they're making. And they've got 14 days from the point that they agree to use the dispute service to submit that evidence to us. And typically we get sent digital images, digital documentation. So it's all pretty much online, save for the odd piece of carpet and tap that comes through the post, of course. And what happens is our adjudicators, who are legally trained, and many of them come from a property background as well, those adjudicators will review the evidence that's been submitted. They'll review the claim that's being made. They'll then make a recommendation in terms of how that dispute should be settled, and effectively that decision becomes binding. And we seek to make all of those decisions within 28 days of it going into that dispute. Now, it's probably worth saying that less than 3% of all of the deposits that we manage and pay back end up in a dispute where an adjudicator has to get involved. So that, again, most of the time, tenants and landlords demonstrate, given that we literally manage hundreds of thousands of these things on an annual basis, tenants and landlords are pretty good at coming to an agreed position at the end of tenancies.
That 3% is an interesting statistic, actually.
Yeah.
Do you think there's going to be sort of lifetime deposits in the near future?
Yeah, I'm sure most of your listeners and yourselves will be aware. The government has talked a lot about commitment around lifetime deposits, and the term lifetime has been used. And we're obviously very interested in the idea of a deposit being able to transfer from one property to another under the same tenant's name and the like. And we have been involved with government and with other broader industry bodies, other tenancy deposit protection providers as well, to talk about how that proposal might work in practice. And I think what's really important is that any proposal under consideration ensures that the interests of all parties, i.e. landlords and tenants, are protected throughout. And I think where it becomes most problematic is at the end of the tenancy, where you might have somebody wishing to leave a property. They've yet to go through a checkout routine. They've yet to satisfy, the last month's rent, whatever it might be. And yet they want to go and secure the next property. And it's that sort of overlapping arrangement at the end that I think is the element that is sort of creating the difficulty in terms of practicality and ensuring that everybody's interests are protected throughout. We definitely think, though, it's a problem that can be solved, and we do believe that as the largest provider of tenancy deposit protection solutions in the UK, that we've got a role to play and provide support to landlords, tenants, and indeed government to make that solution work.
Yeah, I think it feels like it's something that people or the government want to put in place, But coming from the industry, I don't understand how they're going to do it. So it's going to need the DPS, TDS, my deposits to lead that, in my opinion, and say, yes, it's possible, and this is how it's possible, or no, absolutely not, and provide a line almost on behalf of the letting agents, because as an agent, as a landlord, and as a former tenant, I see all angles of it. That me renting number 1 High Street and then moving to number 1 Rodley Drive, I see that as there's two totally separate transactions with 2 totally different landlords. So I can't just port one deposit to the next before I've closed off my previous tenancy. But I also get it as a tenant. You've got 1 deposit locked up here. Do you have the funds to then post another deposit in the short term? And I'm quite public about it. I'm not a massive fan of zero deposit schemes personally. As an agent, as a landlord, I much prefer people to physically put down some collateral, some capital against what they're doing, because I feel like it gives them some involvement on it.
Yeah, I agree with you on all of those points, and it is that period, that overlap period, that is the problem we need to solve. We've got some ideas around it, and we continue to discuss those with government and other parties around the industry. And like, I think it is, if we can come up with a solution that is affordable, that is practical, that's easy to understand and use, then I think it would be good, because I think you will drive perhaps shorter vacant periods. You'll get easier transitions from one let to another. So I think it'd be good for the industry, it'd be good for tenants, good for letting agents and landlords. But we need to come up with a solution that is practical and easy to understand. And as you say, I'm with you. I also think cash is really well understood. It provides that collateral for everybody, and it's there. And I think it's also a lot easier for tenants to understand the risk, if you like, versus perhaps some of the risks that they might not necessarily fully appreciate in a deposit replacement style scenario.
So the 2 final questions, one of them is very much with your DPS hat on, one of them is very much personal opinion. DPS wise, you've already said you're one of the best places to get stats from. What happens next, though?
Yeah, well, it's really hard, isn't it, to say what happens next? But one thing we do know for sure, is, and I said it earlier, is how resilient the private rented sector is, and how we continue to see growth in that area, and in that sector, and we're seeing it year on year out. And the rent index that we report again shows that consistent growth is there. It's rents are rising across all property types, across all regions, year on year. And frankly, we see no reason why that trend doesn't continue over at least the medium term. There's strong demand for rental properties. Lots of stuff is written down about more tenants or prospective tenants than there are rental properties. So we see nothing but good things and a strong performance from the private rented sector over the coming years.
And coming from you, if a property owner comes to you as the MD of the DPS for one piece of advice, what do you give them?
Quite simply, look after your property. It's an asset. It's your asset, and so whilst you may let it, look after it, because I think a well-maintained property, it firstly is attractive to a prospective tenant, and that'll make it easier to let, and likely a longer let will come from it. I think a well-maintained, well-looked-after property, tenants are probably going to be happier in them. They're likely to respecting that property, and you never know, they might even pay the rent on time. Which would be great. And finally, I think a well-maintained property will give you a strong rental value and rental yield for years to come. So for me, it's a simple one. It's look after your properties.
Great advice. And Matt, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. I've really enjoyed this, and there's been some really interesting data I wasn't expecting to get. And I'm a bit of a data geek, so I appreciate that.
But get on the rent index, have a look at that. You'll love that.
I'll be on there. I'll be looking at it tonight when the kids have gone
Friday night lights.
Still rock and roll in my house on a Thursday. So yeah, appreciate your time. And I would say to anyone that's listening, do go and check that out. Depositprotection.com. Obviously, there's going to be some really good information on there. And yeah, thank you very much for your time and your advice to everyone that's listening as well, because it's been very valuable. And I'm sure we will speak again in the near future. So appreciate your time, Matt.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
So Matt's just left us, and another podcast where I'm making notes in these podcasts, just like it's going out of fashion at the moment, because there's so much good value in there, so much good content in there. Hopefully people listening have taken the same. And if people are struggling, maybe new or future landlords are struggling to digest some of this, please reach out to us, comment, get in contact with us, and we'd love to have conversations on a one-on-one level with some of our listeners that just want a little bit more information and clarity on some of the high level stuff that we're talking about. For me, on that particular one, and I mentioned it at the start of the podcast, what I was looking forward to, which Mike kind of elaborated on as well, is the scare that's out there, the fear that's out there for people that have got horror stories. And to actually hear that less than 3% of disputes actually go to the final level of arbitration by the arbiters, that's quite an interesting statistic, because if you were talking to people outside and everyone's got an opinion, people would make out that that's much, much higher, Mike, wouldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always the age-old, I never got my deposit back, or my landlord took my deposit, or the landlord can't get any deposit back to repair things. To be honest, it's a little bit rubbish. The percentages of deposits that are given back in full is massive, and the agreements that are made once things go past there about any deductions takes up the vast majority of the rest of the tenancies out there, because landlords protect themselves with facts, and tenants do exactly the same thing. And if the facts present themselves, then it might take a few rounds, but once the facts have presented themselves, you can make an agreement and everyone can move on quickly.
And we only really deal with people that do it the right way. We know there is a small segment of rogue out there, shall we say. And well, obviously we can't talk on behalf of them, but if you do the right thing and the legal thing, then as you can see, the statistics are very, very low for problems, which is good to see. Tristan, I know you were looking forward to this one. What kind of information did you digest that stood out for you from Matt's chat?
Yeah, a couple of bits for me. The first one is backs up with how the market's been. They've seen an uplift of rental prices of around 9%, which just shows the sheer volume, one, increased numbers, and two, the increased rent that's happening. And that comes from a busy rental market that we've experienced over the last sort of 12 months or so. On top of that are the three main causes of disputes, which we was already aware of some of them, but they're all just slightly different. First one being a clean, followed by damage, and then arrears being the third. So yeah, quite surprised by that.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Well, that's another podcast. I'm off to the depositprotection.com to digest and geek out on some of their statistics. Obviously looking forward to next week's as well. And gents, good to see you on Zoom. Hopefully we'll be allowed back into face-to-face podcast soon. But for the time being, it's working well. And thanks to everyone that's listened or watched on YouTube. And we'll see you all again next week. I'm flicking through YouTube and through Spotify. I don't think there's a podcast or a video channel on YouTube that landlords can land on where they're not being sold something.
I mean, it'd be the first time any estate agents ever asked that question, but why not ask that question to a wider audience?
Estate agents have the knowledge there, but they don't seem to share it.
You can do different episodes based around someone that wants an exit plan or someone that's just starting their portfolio.
The rules change every year.
Yeah.
But why not just open the floor out and just say, well, is property even the best investment out there?
And tax advice is a big thing, especially with everything that's changed, capital gains tax, and obviously your stamp duty costs that you need to pay and whatnot. People don't realise what they need to prepare for.
We build a podcast and we build a YouTube channel, somewhere that landlords can go and they feel they're not being sold to, but they're just getting quality advice.